It's episode 65 of the Author Stories podcast, and I'm your host, Hank Garner. Find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. This week, my guest is Richard Gleaves. Richard joins me again on the show for this very special Halloween show to talk about scary stories and spooky stories. And he has just finished the third book in his trilogy, and the third book is called General of the Dead in his Sleepy Hollow series. I hope you'll go pick it up. And when you do, be sure to use the Amazon link in the right-hand column of hankgarner.com. Click on that, then do your normal Amazon shopping, and you can help support the show. Also, I'd like to thank our podcast patrons. You can go to hankgarner.com, click on the patrons link at the top, and you can support the show on a weekly basis. And I'd like to thank Stefan Boltz and Rob McClellan for becoming patrons of the show. Thank you for all you do. Please go to iTunes and rate the show so that other people can find it and see all of the great archives we have. Now on with our show with Richard Gleaves. Thank you for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm very happy this week to bring you this bonus episode of Author Stories and to have my friend Richard Gleaves on the show. Richard and I met last year, I believe through Michael Bunker. And since then, I got a hold of Richard's first two books, Rise, Headless and Ride, and Bridge of Bones, and have become an uber fan, as have my entire family. And I told Richard a while back that I knew he was working on the third book of the trilogy, and I tried not to, but I kind of harassed him a little bit on Facebook about, finish the book, and then when you do, please come back on the show so we can talk about it. And I was traveling this week, I think it was Thursday, and I met Stefan Boltz over in the neighboring state, and we had a meetup. And on the way back, we were chatting on Facebook about a picture that I posted and tagged Richard in. And Richard said, I wish we would have planned out a Halloween show. And I said, it's never too late to plan out a Halloween show. So we're bringing you this bonus episode that we did not plan except for a couple of days ago. And Richard was very gracious with his time to say, sure, he would come on and talk about writing spooky stories and writing trilogies and what it was like to finish the third book and all this great stuff that we're going to get into. But without further ado, welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you, Hank. Thanks for having me back. And I am thrilled to be back with you because I am just glad to be doing anything else but writing the end of this last book.
I know you are. I know you are.
You caught me. I just finished the third book of the trilogy on Wednesday. And this is Saturday that we're recording this.
That's crazy.
So I collapsed on Thursday, I vegged on Friday, and today we're doing a podcast. So if I sound a little loopy, that's why.
Well, this episode is going to go out probably on Thursday of that week. So you will be like 1 week separated from this book when everyone else listens to this.
Looking back and saying, oh my God, listen to him. And so happy Halloween, first of all, to everybody.
Yes.
Too, it's coming up on Thursday.
That's right. And I'm so happy you decided to come on the show because you have crafted a series that is engaging, is fun, and is very spooky without being obnoxiously what's the word? Horrific. It's horror without being gory and without being over the top. And it's one of those stories that absolutely draws you in. And part of the charm is the setting. It's a very familiar setting to most people. Though when you finish book 2, you will be so immersed in the setting and know things that you never thought you would. So before we get any further, let's just do a very quick recap for people that may not have heard the first episode that you were on. What is the series and what was the inspiration for it?
Well, the inspiration was Halloween. because in 2012 I was I was 44 years old, and I realized that as an adult I was not doing anything Halloween. Year after year, I wasn't carving a pumpkin, I wasn't greeting trick-or-treaters or anything. So I put my wheeled my elbow to my nose to the grindstone, whatever body part we want to talk about, and went to Sleepy Hollow, New York in 2012 on a whim, because it's only about a half an hour from where I live. And I was wandering around the graveyard, and I remembered being a kid doing grave rubbings with my grandmother on a cross-country trip. And I had an urge to write about a kid doing grave rubbings, coming to Sleepy Hollow, and then what happened. It's just an acorn. And over the course of the past 3 years, I've been putting out a book a year. The first book, Rise, Headless, and Ride, is a fairly small story about Jason Crane and his first adventure in Sleepy Hollow that climaxes with a Halloween chase and leaves some open threads. And so the second book I turned to, and remember, these are my first novels. I'm a composer, I'm a playwright, but Rise, Headless, and Ride was my first novel. And so I turned to Bridge of Bones, the sequel, and suddenly a great deal of Pandora's box kind of opened. And Bridge of Bones is almost twice as long as Rise, Headless, and Ride. It's 180,000 words. I mean, it is a substantial book. And the world that I was building around Sleepy Hollow grew, sending back tendrils to the 19th century. And then in the third book, the world grew even wider, even deeper, and sent back tendrils all the way back to the era that Washington Irving was originally writing about. So finally, in the third book, I've come all the way full circle back to colonial Tarrytown. And one of the things that was very important to me was to do it all with the real town and the real history. So Rise, Headless, and Ride, Bridge of Bones, and General the Dead are all also accurate historical research. I went back and found the original streets and the original sites of the tavern and everything that is underneath the modern city. And in each book, we've peeled off another layer of Sleepy Hollow to find what Washington Irving was writing about, because he knew Tarrytown as a real place where he spent part of his teen years, and that he fell in love with it there. He lived there until he died. His manor house, Sunnyside, is a tourist attraction, national landmark. And he knew a real place. And what I wanted to do, I loved Sleepy Hollow when I was a kid. So once I was there in the real place on this Halloween trip, I got this urge to peel all the layers of modernity back off of this town and find Ichabod and Katrina and Brom and where they all came from and where they lived and what kind of world Washington Irving was writing about. And over the course of 3 novels, it's been peeling back that onion and finding the kernels. And of course, I've built up my whole other supernatural mythology and a world that can extend beyond Sleepy Hollow. And I have plans for books that take place in Salem, and they all work within this magic system that I've developed. And it's been a joy, and it's been one of the greatest intellectual endeavors of my life because of the real history and all the time that I have spent walking the streets of Sleepy Hollow. Because, as I say, it's only a half hour of here. I have done innumerable research trips to pretty much find every interesting place in the modern town and incorporate it into the story and set some plot element around it.
And you are right. These books are massive. The first book, Rise, Headless, and Ride, is a very respectable 300 and some odd pages.
110,000.
110, okay. And then Bridge of Bones, as you said, 180.
180.
And that's what they sound like on my desk here.
Yeah.
You can break a toe on these, and they're absolutely They're absolutely
Wait till you see
beautiful and
General of the
stunning.
Dead,
I
Hank.
can't wait. I can't wait.
Wait till you see General of the Dead. Oh my God.
Okay, so I've got so many questions for you. So
Sure.
first,
Just to
uh,
tell you, General of the Dead is clocking in right now. Of course, I just finished the draft on Wednesday, so
yeah,
there's going to be cutting, but it's coming in right now at about 250.
wow, nice.
So
Um,
I've had a couple busy years.
yeah. So okay, so you've got a draft finished, and the
Yeah,
story is complete, and you're happy with the story arc. Where do you go
very
from
much.
here?
Well, like I said, there are open elements. I've devised the trilogy of it, you can almost say the entire trilogy is an origin story for my main character, Jason Crane, covering everything up to his 18th birthday.
Right.
And then from there, I have certain revelations that open other doors, and to apply the same kind of research and historical mixture of fact and fantasy to Salem. And there are elements that I baked in from the very beginning because I knew this is the direction I wanted to go. So there are elements of Edgar Allan Poe, and there are elements of Nathaniel Hawthorne's House of the Seven Gables and certain, witch trial things that are built into, you can read Rise, Headless, and Ride as a Sleepy Hollow story, but if you're paying attention, you'll see there's an Usher family and there's a Mall
Right.
family, which is the family from House of the Seven Gables, and there are all kinds of things that are baked in. So where does it go from here? It really can go indefinitely. It depends on reader interest and whether I can continue the pace and the keep up the enthusiasm.
Yeah. When do you anticipate General of the Dead being available?
November 27th, it's available for pre-order now. And I have to say, the pre-orders for General of the Dead have been amazing. They are off the chart compared to the pre-orders for Bridge of Bones. I mean, I'm very happy with how things are going.
Well,
And
yeah,
I get, yeah.
because people have gotten to the end of book two and they're like, "Dang it, Richard!"
I know. Book two is a massive cliffhanger, and I am so grateful if there's anybody listening to this who got to the end of Bridge of Bones and said, "What the?"
Yeah.
and were pissed off at me.
Well,
Just trust me. I'm sorry. It had to be that way.
well, if
You
you
don't
remember,
plan these things sometimes.
if you remember a couple of months ago, you asked me if I had finished Bridge of Bones yet, and I said, no, I've kind of been dragging my feet because I could sense it. I knew what you were going to do at the end of that
Yeah.
book, and I said, no, I need to be closer to book three before I do, because I knew I was going to be pissed off about it. And
Well,
now
I didn't
you were
plan
right, I
it.
was.
I didn't plan any of this. Actually, the story was not originally intended to be a trilogy. I tell you, because I was writing my first novel, and I was writing it. And I tell you, at first I was just kind of piddling around because I started after that Halloween trip and
Right.
just kind of a little here, a little there until about February of the following year when I found out that there was this Sleepy Hollow TV show starting, and that it was starting in September. And I went, oh no, a Sleepy Hollow TV show set in the modern world, and here I'm writing the same thing. I got to get my novel written before that thing starts. So I actually wrote Rise, Headless, and Ride and truncated my original plan to create the ending that it has so that I could publish it on September 16th, with September 17th being the premiere of the Sleepy Hollow TV show.
Nice.
And so once I truncated it, I had this other section of story, and that was the acorn that Bridge of Bones grew out of. And then writing Bridge of Bones, I discovered all these things, and I was like, you know what? This is 3 books. Oh, man. Sorry, readers. Bang, cliffhanger at the end of book 2. It's just no other way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. So you did not originally see this as a trilogy. This was a standalone story in your mind?
I didn't know what it was when I first started.
You were just writing because you were inspired and the joy of
yeah,
writing.
Yeah, I was. I'd never written a novel before. And like I said, I've been writing for my entire adult life. I mean, I've written I think last time we talked about writing a musical for Korea, but I've
Yeah.
also written about 7 1 acts. I've written farce. I've written a musical that was done at Goodspeed Opera in Connecticut, and various pieces. And I've been a composer, and I've done art songs. And I mean, I've been writing and video editing and doing a lot of things for a lot of years, but I had never written a novel. And so when I sat down to do it, it was just kind of, I would introduce something. I would say, okay, I've gotten 2 chapters in, and I need some tension. Something happens, what? Somebody gets killed. Okay, I don't know who the killer is. And it was just a journey. It's kind of like finding a path of lanterns in the woods. And you find the first lantern, and it glows. And then the next lantern ahead, it starts to glow. And so you follow it. And the next thing you know, you're following this long path of lanterns into clearings that you never thought you'd discover. You're starting to see constellations you never discovered, types of trees you never discovered. And the next thing you know, you have walked into a wide wood, and it's all just there, and there are lanterns everywhere, and you don't know where even to start. And that's what I just feel like I found a world. And Stephen King talks about this, that writing a novel is kind of like finding one bone of the dinosaur and then spending the rest of your time trying to find out what kind of dinosaur you've uncovered, kind of brushing off the story little by little. And it's true. It's true, because as the story grew, I just found serendipities and things. It was like it was always there.
And so that is that's a wonderful part of the process when you're uncovering these things. But when you got to the end of book 1, did you then see the end of the story arc when you said, okay, now this is longer than this actually is? Did you understand where you were going in the long term, or
yes?
Okay, gotcha. So
yes.
you were working in a bigger framework.
Yeah, I knew what the answers to the important things were.
Okay.
And I sat down with a legal pad at my mom's house in her guest bedroom one night, and I wrote maybe 2 legal pads worth of climax stuff. And I've changed a lot of it, but a lot of it is exactly what I wrote then. And I tell you, it's linked up so beautifully. And there's the climax of General of the Dead is 50,000 words and like 16 chapters. I mean, it is just this massive structure that just came together so beautifully. I can't tell you, and I hope people will be able to see it soon. But I always knew where the arrow was going to land. I just didn't know what kind of pattern it was going to make getting there. It's just this zigzaggy thing, but I knew where the target was.
Yeah. Well, Jim Butcher was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about the day that he came up with the idea for the Dresden Files, and his writing teacher told him that he had a kernel of an idea in a couple chapters, and she said, "Okay, now go finish planning this out." And he came back with a 20-book outline, with the entire 20 novel story arc within a trilogy topping that off. And that was nearly 20 years ago, and he said he's still working from that same kind of rough outline. That, of course, there are twists and turns along the way in characters that have developed, and he's found out things, but the kernel of the story is still there, which fascinates me, that these ideas just kind of come from nowhere, and they hold up. And which is crazy, the power of story. And
I can see myself doing that with the Jason books. I mean, I have plenty of ideas of novels that I'd like to write in different genres too. But I can already tell that I've got at least 7 books in the Jason series, maybe 9, maybe 3 trilogies: Sleepy Hollow, Salem, and Poe, in that order. And I mean, I've got the plots already worked out. It's just a question of, being able to, afford the rent while you do something this large. Because, like I say, it's a lot. It's a big project to write a book this big in a year. I'm not sure what the standard is as far as what people attempt, but I've done 500,000 words on this series in 3 years. And, the idea of doing more at this point where I just finished the draft on Wednesday, there's nothing. Oh, I shudder. That's what scares me at Halloween, the idea of never being finished. But I could see that happening right now. I just want to pretend that the trilogy is done and I can, have fun for a couple of weeks.
You talked about being at your mom's house and having that legal pad and a pen.
Yeah.
You posted a photo on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it's longer than that. I don't know. But there was a big handful of these dry, empty ink pens, and that was your load of pens for the week. That you had. So what is it with you and longhand writing? Is that your default position? Does the story flow better that way? Is there just something magical about that for you?
It's a process thing. You look at being able to write a dirty first draft and make mistakes. When you're writing at the computer, I find that I'm 3 paragraphs in, and the first paragraph is laughing at me, saying, "Oh, you didn't do a good job on this paragraph. I know you want to go forward, but I'm just hanging here in front of your eyes, and you can see the mistakes in it as you're writing." And it's I find it distracting. You're typing on the computer, and you're writing, and then you glance up, and you're like, "Oh, I screwed up something there, first paragraph." And it's right there, perfectly clear for you to see, and it's just begging you to go back and edit. And a lot of writers don't understand how the writing process works if you're going to be prolific. There are 2 stages to it. There's the subconscious stage and the conscious stage. And the subconscious stage, you have to stop yourself from editing. The subconscious stage is going into a trance and generating material and letting everything come out. And you cannot stop and go back and tinker, or else you are out of the moment. You have to be in the moment as the character, looking around, smelling the perfume and the grass and seeing the sunshine and being able to describe it. You have to be there. You cannot be on paragraph 1 going back and tinkering. So what I found is that for me, anyway, writing on a legal pad, particularly in kind of dim light and kind of lounging around kind of state, my penmanship is so bad that I can't tell what's on the first paragraph once I've written it. And I just kind of keep going because there's no temptation to go back and edit because I can't make heads or tails out of the earlier pages. But I find that later, when I go to the computer and I look at a legal pad, I can puzzle out every word that I was writing. It's just I can't do it in the moment. So it kills that impetus to go back and tinker, and allows me on a legal pad to just let my hand drift and stay in that subconscious, wide iris state. I think I described it once as creating a pond for stargazing, and the merest breath can ripple and cloud it. But you have to just be in the dream. And then the second part of the process is editing. But I find that writing on the computer, it's just too easy to jump back and tinker. And I've had to
completely agree.
I've had to lose that process here in the past few months because to try and get General of the Dead written for a Halloween deadline, I could not write it twice. I had to just write it once in the computer because there's just not physically enough time. But I do, if you have the time to do it, if you can stand the hand cramps, legal pads are great for that kind of staying in the drowsy subconscious state. And I think that people underestimate the importance of dividing those two mental tasks from each other.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've heard Neil Gaiman say that he has a similar process. He writes things longhand. on a legal pad, and usually like at a coffee shop or somewhere just completely unplugged. And
Hmm.
then in the typing it into the computer, you then get a second draft and edit as you go, which is a bonus. Uh, I have not tried the writing out longhand because my penmanship is atrocious.
But that's
But I,
good. Like I
but I,
said, it
well,
can be
yeah,
good as long as you
yeah,
can read
and
it later.
right, and I may try that. But I have some other tricks that I use. I use Scrivener, and I'll write in full screen mode and turn off spell check and all of that stuff so that it just flows. And then I usually keep an acoustic guitar next to me, and sometimes if I'm kind of getting outside my head, I'll pick up the guitar and I'll just play through a chord progression or something that just kind of
Music is great.
yeah, it just kind of lets me escape out of my head for a minute, and then the ideas start rolling back in. So I think the key is to find out what it is that gets you plugged into your creativity and
Yeah.
then keep that thing close at hand for sure.
I will share one thing that I do, and it's kind of embarrassing, and I'll never do it in front of another person, but it's a great trick for me anyway. I find that there's a lot of resistance to getting into that psychological state of generating material. There's a lot of self-doubt, that your own concern about whether it's going to be good or whatever can get in the way of just sitting down and getting to work. And so I discovered a trick that I use is I sit down with a tape recorder, because the tape recorder forces you to externalize things. It's almost like having an audience. And I put the tape recorder on and I just start to babble, kind of like I'm doing now. But really just kind of, tree, wind, green, purple, shadow, night, fall, experimenting with language,
Yeah.
just kind of improvising poems and sitting there and just doing it over and over and over until you feel a fluent string of words coming out easily, endlessly. And that's when you just put the tape recorder aside and pick up the pen and go for it. And it's a great trick because it activates your language centers. You're speaking aloud, you're getting very conscious of the color of words, and writing is too often silence. You're
Yeah.
sitting there at the computer and tap, 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 tap. And then there's many writers that, it's a great story, but then you try to read it aloud or hear it in audiobook, and you can just sense that they've lost the storytelling, the verbal aspect of the storytelling. And for ghost stories especially, you have to have that language color. But
Do you think that babbling and getting connected to the to that other part of your brain, do you think that helps with the cadence of your
definitely.
prose? And can you tell a difference when that starts flowing? That the words have, well, you said it, that you get that almost audible spoken quality. That the language is not, and you're right. You can tell a difference between prose that is flat on the page and that someone is communicating out loud to you. That's a great trick to
Hmm.
kind of bridging those two things together. Uh, my
I find
wife
that
would.
you do your. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that a lot of times before I write, my wife and I have this swing in our yard that we'll sit in, and I'll tell her kind of what I'm thinking, and I'll have these ideas, and I start kind of painting these pictures for her, and then I can immediately go to the computer and I can just start writing. So maybe that's a similar kind of connection. That's interesting.
Hmm. Um, find whatever tricks work for you, but the only thing is that everyone's brain works the same, and you just have to understand that you do all your thinking. You do all your thinking about craft. You do all your observations about human nature. You use your eyes and you look at the world and you know what a tree looks like and you know what a building looks like and what a Maserati looks like. And you store these things in your subconscious. And that's all a conscious process, reading books on craft and thinking about plot and doing your preparatory work and that sort of thing, doing your outlines. But then writing itself is a process of letting all those things go and trusting that you've done enough groundwork that your subconscious will inspirationally give you what you need. You give it its marching orders, and then you get out of its way. And that is a very difficult thing to sustain, and it takes practice to open it up. And the more you do it, the more prolific you are, because it takes self-confidence. You have to sit down at the legal pad or the computer and say, I am God and I can do no wrong, and trust yourself to just write however it comes out. Whatever comes out is perfect. You can always fix it. But getting out of your way, however you have to do it, is so important, particularly if you want to write more than, little 10,000 word short stories.
Yeah.
Because you need the fuel for a big thing, for a big work.
Now, what advice would you give people? You said if you want to break out of that 10,000 word, and there are lots of people that write lots of short fiction and seem to be comfortable there. Can you give any advice for taking that comfortable? I don't have a great word for it, but this where you get comfortable writing.
Yeah, you like the self-confidence to tackle something very large.
Yes.
And as a first-time novelist, I didn't know what I couldn't do. I think that's part of it. Sitting down to write Rise, Headless, and Ride, I think because I had spent so many years concentrating on I was going to make it as a composer or a playwright or this other stuff, when I sat down to write my little novel, it was like there was no pressure on me. It wasn't like this burning desire I'd always had, I'm going to be a great novelist and write a great American novel. It was pure creative joy, without self-censorship, without self-doubt, because I went into it thinking, well, this is going to be shit, but, I have to do it. And then because I got out of my way and let myself just explore and have fun, I think that's why Rise Headless turned out to be such a fun book and such a little acorn that could grow this world, because it was just imagination. It was just having fun, letting it go. And I think if you're spending a lot of time doing your short stories or doing smaller works and you're fearful of writing a big epic, I think it's the fear that's going to make you not be able to write the big epic. It's letting go of that and just saying, okay, let's write this story, and however it turns out, it turns out. Maybe it's a big epic, and maybe it's not. But I think self-doubt and fear are the killers of all creativity. And I think if I've been able to write an epic, 3-volume trilogy of 500,000 words in 3 years, it's mostly because I didn't know that I couldn't, or I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be able to, or whatever it was. Yeah. It's just, I felt like doing it, and I did it.
Yeah.
So.
And we've got people like Malcolm Gladwell, God love him, who writes things, like the 10,000 hours, to become an expert at something, and I think that those things are there's a lot of truth in those, and there are lessons that can be learned. But I think people take that and say, well, I can't write a novel because I first need to write 10 novels that stink. And put those in a desk drawer before I can do the thing that I want to do.
Well, I'm not saying that you don't have to know your craft.
Right.
Remember that I also spent 20 years writing plays, and
exactly.
I was as a writer before I wrote a novel. So I have been immersed in structure, in plot, in how to devise a French scene, and how to write dialogue.
And those muscles are similar.
Right, and also as a lyricist. Writing for music theater, as a lyricist, I was focused on the color and rhythm of words from a very early age. So you develop your toolkit. What I'm saying is not that, oh, well, craft isn't important or studying isn't important and you just go for it. is what I'm saying is you got to trust that the thinking that you've done is stored in your subconscious. That whatever you are capable of doing, if you get out of your way, you'll find out what it is. And I'm very happy that with my first book, I found out that all those things that I had stored out was enough of a reservoir and fuel for this huge big thing. And maybe you haven't, if someone is trying to write something large and can't, maybe they just haven't built up enough of a store of thinking about craft and plot and all that kind of stuff yet. But anybody can do it. You just have to do your thinking before you get out of your own way and let your subconscious take over. Does that make sense at all?
That makes perfect sense. So it's building your toolkit, and it's important to. I think it's important to diversify that toolkit some. Who knew that developing lyrics and writing plays and all of that would come in handy one day for writing a novel.
Right.
I think we think about these things so singularly that we can't understand, especially in the way we think in society about things being very specialized, and people can only have one thing that they're good at, and we don't realize how these things overlap and inform each other. So look around and find the thing that you've been doing and look to see how that has been helping you all along.
And also, just the events of your life. And, if you go through life as a thinking person and you have philosophical convictions and you have an understanding of society's structures, how people are, what drives them, all of these things are important and will feed your writing. You don't necessarily go in there saying, okay, I am going to concentrate on my philosophical toolkit for the purposes of the novel today.
Right.
But all those things, the more you are a thinking person, the more that you are a studying person, the more that you are a curious and imaginative person, all those things will store up. And it is like storing kindling, and you're ready to just get out of your way, let the match drop, and let it, be as small or as big a conflagration as it, circumstances will. You never know until you try.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's shift gears for a moment away from process and craft, and hopefully we have scratched that itch for the process nerds out there, like I am, and I know you are.
I'm a process nerd.
Me too. I love it. I could talk
Halloween.
I know, but it's Halloween.
Process isn't scary.
That's right. But you did mention a minute ago about ghost stories, and if you're writing those, what's that?
I said writer's block is scary.
Yes, it is. Yes.
I think Stephen King's written about 9 novels about the scariness of writer's block. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. You're absolutely right. That is was terrifying for writers, and can do horrible psychological things to people.
By the way, there is an element of why writers get blocked in what we've been talking about, because sometimes you tell your subconscious 2 conflicting things. That this needs to be a powerful love story and also have a lot of jokes. And that's what freezes you up. It's the contradiction. Your subconscious doesn't know how to process it and give you what you're asking of it. So that when you're writer's block, you kind of look and see, what kind of standing orders that you're giving to your imagination and see if you're giving it some, contradictory thing. So anyway, I just want to interject that.
Well, yeah, and hopefully writing on that legal pad in longhand helps to get around that. We can't help just going back to it.
Of course, you end up getting a Captain Hook claw after it's all done.
That's right. But you mentioned a minute ago about ghost stories, and especially if you're going to write ghost stories, they need to be have a very verbal quality about them.
Very, very much so.
Yeah, and that leads me to ask you about ghost stories in general, and about the things that you started uncovering when you went to Sleepy Hollow and started learning about the history and the culture there. And I'm assuming that there are lots of local legend that you were able to pull out and start parsing, and maybe gleaning some actual truth out of these legends and ghost stories. But so tell me about ghost stories and how they connect with this verbal history of a place.
Definitely. Okay, so you got to look and say, why do people read ghost stories in the first place? I mean, the pat answer is they want to get in touch with something primal, something old, something very deep, that sense of fear. Well, where does that sense of fear come from? I think fear comes from ignorance. You think about being a child and you don't know much about the world. So you don't know what that creak is. You don't know what that bump that is, that shudder. That is the place where spooky comes from. Spooky comes from not knowing what's around the corner and what's looking at you. And that is different from horror. Horror is the adult version of that same thing. Now, adults are not scared by creaks and bumps and things that go knock in the night.
Speak for yourself.
Well, I mean, adults are not supposed to be anyway.
Right.
So I am too. I mean, the time you think you hear somebody in the kitchen and you dart out of bed going, "There's somebody in the house, there's somebody in the house." That's exactly what I'm talking about. That kind of
Right.
spooky thing.
Right.
But there are a couple of ways as an adult to get that feeling of childhood. The sad truth of modern culture, you look at the Saw movies, Final Destination, etc., is that most people opt to up the stimulus. They're not scared by bumps in the night or whatever, so they got to ramp it up to feel that feeling, that thrill of fear. They've got to ramp it up to actual people with an axe and eyeballs coming out and chop you up into little bits. And it's upping the stimulus almost like a junkie going for a bigger and bigger dose of fear until you get this insane nihilistic crap that's out there. Okay?
Right.
Now, the other way to go is the ghost story route. There's horror, and then there's ghost story. And ghost story takes the adult and brings them back to that place of being a child. So rather than saying, I got to up the stimulus to get the same thing, is you got to take the adult back to being that little kid and make them afraid of the bump in the night. That's something that Stephen King does beautifully. There's something a lot of writers does beautifully. It's the higher art form, as far as I'm concerned, is to take someone who is just sitting there in bed looking at scribbles on a screen or in a book and make them so wide awake, aware of sound and whispers. And this is where the language comes in, because you look at how does a child feel in the middle of the night? It feels like prey. You feel like prey and there's a hunter out there. And that's the emotion that you want to get in a spooky story. And what happens when you're prey? All the physiological, psychological things get heightened. Your ears get real big and your eyes get real big and you can smell everything. And that is why ghost stories have heightened language, because you're trying to recreate that state of psychological openness and wonder and that wide prey feeling. And that is the hardest thing to do in spooky writing, and one of the most beautiful things when you can pull it off. I think I've pulled it off twice in Rise Headless and Bridge of Bones. So you just put your character in, I don't think it's a spoiler, but there's the underground sequence in Bridge of Bones where Jason is exploring the tunnels underneath the house. And it's just, vague sensory things and moving shadows and getting into that headspace. And then in Rise Headless, there's a walk through the cemetery that is the same thing, and it's all about the sounds of the crickets and the sound of your own feet and that sort of stuff. That is why language is so important in a spooky story. Now, I love science fiction, and I would love to write like science fiction, but science fiction can get away. You can write like like a textbook manual in some senses, because the genre calls for it. The genre calls for a strictly rational adult mindset. I don't know if I could write in science fiction, simply because as a person and as a writer, I'm too in love with the euphony and the synesthesia of strange combinations of language. And I think I'm much more suited for spooky because of it. even though, as a person, I mean, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't, all this stuff. But as a writer, I just think that's where my sweet spot is. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, uh, kind of. But I do know what you're saying about science fiction. I have a lot of friends that are science fiction writers, and I sometimes get lumped in with some of those writers in some writing groups and things like that. But I definitely do not write science fiction. I write these stories that all have a weird element that where things kind of go off the rails and no one can
hmm
explain it. And that's the thing that really excites me is finding the mundane and the everyday
hmm
normal, and then finding out what's happening behind those things.
Oh
And
yeah.
it that tickles something inside all of us that want to like you said, I don't believe in ghosts, but man, there's a powerful story in there when you can look at things that are behind the things.
Well,
Um,
every ghost story is a form of history. If you look at, okay, you're talking about a local legend. Say there's a local legend that church is haunted. What will they tell you? The old ladies of the neighborhood will tell you, oh yes, when that church was first built, there were 17 men that worked on it, and 4 of them died. And they say one of him was bricked up in the chimney that season. And sometimes in the dead of night, you can hear him, chink 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 on the brickwork because that was his job. And yeah, and it is a form of folk history. A ghost
yeah,
story is it's almost like a little memorial to those 4 people that died at building the church that otherwise might be forgotten to history entirely, because history is about generals and presidents and that sort of thing. So how do you and I and the man down the street, how do we preserve our little folk history? And I think ghost stories are a form of folk history, because what we're doing is taking a story and attaching it to a place. And I think one of the things that I've discovered writing the Jason books is how important place is to myth and legend. You can't really take the Headless Horseman and put him down in Los Angeles and have it be the same story. The Headless Horseman belongs in Sleepy Hollow. And Sleepy
right.
Hollow has a particular atmosphere and a particular landscape. And Washington Irving's very particular about the layout of the town, and I try to be too. But ghost stories are about place, and they're about history, and they're about peeling off the layers one by one. Because you find a ghost in the house, and what do you have to do? You have to discover her history and find out where her bones really are, and what 300 years ago she was thinking on the night of her wedding when her groom never showed up, and why she can never be at peace. It's every single ghost story is a mystery, and one of the difficult things is to sustain that. And there are some tricks that I found writing a trilogy, but um, in any, even in a tiny little ghost story, it's going to be connected to a place, and it's going to be like, this is why haunted house or any kind of ghost story in that sense, and it's going to have a certain sense of digging, almost like opening a grave. You say you are digging back into the past to find the kernel of truth. And so it mixes in with all kinds of things like genealogy and all kinds of stuff that I lump into the Jason books.
Now, Richard, I know you grew up in Texas. Is that right?
Uh-huh. Yes.
And I grew up in Mississippi in the Deep South. Uh, and our seasons are very different than in Sleepy Hollow.
Mm-hmm.
And do when you talk about a place mattering so much to these stories, and that Sleepy Hollow could not take place in Los Angeles, do you is there something magical about that time of year in Sleepy Hollow that really sets the stage for these novels, and not only place, but does season play a role
Mm-hmm.
in that as well?
Yeah, that was one of the things that actually was difficult in writing the trilogy, because the first book took place during Halloween, and then I had to find how do you make Sleepy Hollow spooky through winter, spring, and summer as the
Right.
story continues. So you end up getting into harsh blizzards and scary winds and that sort of thing. But you're right that autumn and New England are very much in our cultural DNA as Halloween.
Yeah.
If you look at, even you look at, it's the great pumpkin Charlie Brown and the big piles of autumn leaf and Snoopy's dancing in the piles, and you get the big pumpkin patches, and that's just Halloween to us. And
Right.
I'm not exactly sure why it is, and it may have to do with Washington Irving, because he was one of our great literary talents and maybe our first real man of letters in the Americas, and the legend of Sleepy Hollow, with that sense of autumnal New England, valley-covered bridges, pumpkins, ghosts, rivers, glens, all of these things. I do think that Washington Irving is practically the source in the Americas of the Halloween mood. And I want working with his location in Sleepy Hollow and the burying grounds and the churches and the valleys and stuff and the haunted bridges. It just very much feels like some ur-text at the heart of spooky in American folklore.
You're absolutely right, because we have a Halloween party every year. My wife is a lover of Halloween, and we have a bonfire, and we'll cook chili and have hot cider and all of this great stuff. And it is normally still in the high 80s here. Halloween.
Not right
We
now.
are.
I mean, it's Halloween. I'm in New York, and the trees are yellow and orange, and it's amazing up here. And I wish I weren't so tired, because I'd love to go on a road trip and see some foliage, but all I want to do is sleep.
Yeah. We still have green leaves everywhere. I'm literally wearing shorts and t-shirt that I've been in all day. But there's something we have been so. The story that is wrapped around Halloween is so endearing to all of us that we will do things that do not make sense because we want to be a part of that story, because it has grabbed us in some way. So we will be sweating in shorts and t-shirts just to have a bonfire, and it's crazy. But yeah, I think you're right. Washington Irving has had this has captivated us all with the stories of this place that makes us all want to be there and be a part of it.
Even Ichabod's ravenous appetite at the table is just, it's harvest season. It's autumn. It is, bring in and make the pumpkin pies and, all the best meats and the best cuts. Even that is in Sleepy Hollow. This harvest cornucopia, Thanksgiving-ish kind of feel is in the story too. And everybody, it's not a coincidence, I think, that over time and adaptations, it's turned from just being a pumpkin that Brom Bones throws at Ichabod, and it's become a jack-o'-lantern. It's really become a symbol of Halloween. In the original story, it's a quilting frolic and it's autumn, but it's not a jack-o'-lantern. It's just a pumpkin. And actually, the pumpkin was introduced to the Dutch settlers in Westchester County. I mean, I don't think they'd seen one in the old country. But Sleepy Hollow is just part of the DNA. And there's something about the place itself, too. It is the woods there, which are still the same woods because they were preserved by the Rockefeller family. They are twisty and as autumnal as you can imagine, with fallen logs and piles of leaf and chittering things in the woods and little meandering streams. It is just magnificent for mood. And I've spent a lot of time up in Sleepy Hollow in the course of writing, getting inspiration from the place, wandering around in the woods after dark, trying to get into Ichabod's headspace. Or I've have an arrangement with the people at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. They know me by now, and they've locked me in the cemetery a few times to wander around with a tape recorder at 2:00 in the morning and tell myself a ghost story about witches and ancient secrets as I'm walking around with my iPod in my hand, just talking. At 3 a.m. I come back and find a parking ticket on my car. Thanks, Sleepy Hollow. And there's just something about I couldn't write these books if I wasn't in the place and absorbing the place and really falling in love with the place. And I think it is very much the Halloween town.
Yeah.
Aside from Salem, it's our big Halloween town.
You were telling me before I hit record about the uh, kind of the crescendo to this, and you were sitting there on site
Oh yeah,
writing the end. Would you share that story with everyone else?
sure. There were a couple of sticky sections in General of the Dead. One, just to back up a little bit, one of my models for writing the trilogy and writing ghost stories that, peeling back that onion, I love Anne Rice, the Mayfair Witches, the Vampire Lestat. She does something very smart in those books, that each subsequent book goes further back in the history. So you get the first book about Lestat and Louis, and then the second book is about Lestat in the 16th, 17th century, I forget. And then the next book goes back to ancient Egypt. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper as you go. So one of the things that I found as a sticking place, I got to book 3, and it was really time to write an extended section of 9 chapters. It's a small novel in it itself that all takes place is my retelling of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. And so I'm spending a lot of time at the Historical Society, finding the original roads, where was the tavern. And I wanted to be absolutely accurate with the families and everything else. And I retold the legend of Sleepy Hollow in this one, infusing it with my magical system and all my backstory and everything. And I'm really happy with what it came out. That was one of the hardest stretches of writing. And then I found, as I was coming to the climax, and spoiler alert a little bit, the climax takes place in the woods at the broken bridge, the former bridge where Ichabod's climax takes place. I very much wanted to have the climax of the series, of the trilogy at least, take place in the same place, that same bridge.
Well, where else would it be?
Exactly,
Yeah.
So
That's not
as
spoilery.
I know. Well, as I was developing it, I was just kind of stuck sitting down here in New York in my apartment, and I'm like, okay, I need a last research trip up to Sleepy Hollow, and I wandered around, spent some time in the cemetery, did some this and that, and then when it got time to the end, I wrote the end of the trilogy. I hiked through the woods out to the bridge, and I sat with my tape deck, cross-legged on the Headless Horseman side of Ichabod's Bridge, just over the water, tape deck in my hand for about an hour, and narrated the entire climax there on site. And it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life to finish this 3-year journey sitting in this place that, I don't know, if you love the story like I do, and it has such resonance going back to your childhood, it's almost like a sacred spot. I mean, it's Ichabod's Bridge of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and I'm writing the climax of 3 years of my life in 500,000 words, and I'm sitting on those stones. There's nothing to describe it. It's just beautiful. And I walked out of that forest just blubbering in tears. It was a wonderful day.
Well, I know what you mean by it seemed like a sacred spot to you. Uh, and people that are not writers maybe don't get this sometimes. But there are times when I write things that are and every way that you put it in words sounds cliche, but it's nearly a transcendental experience that you have gone somewhere else, you have touched something that you didn't know you had, and then to anchor that to an actual place that seems to give the story to you has to be chilling and exciting and kind of all of those things wrapped into one.
I knew on the hike back from the bridge through the woods, I knew it was the last research trip. I knew it was my last trip to Sleepy Hollow, and I felt like Sleepy Hollow had given me a beautiful thing. It's like, I'm not a kid. I mean, I'm 47 now, and spent a lot of time toiling in the salt mines. I really do feel that this trilogy is the best work that I've ever done. And walking out of those woods and really feeling that, you know, such a sense of accomplishment, and really feeling like the place gave it to me, because it was that first Halloween trip that sparked it, and that final research trip sitting at the bridge that concluded it. And I just burst out in the middle of the woods. I screamed, "I love Sleepy Hollow!" in the middle of Ichabod's woods as loud as I could, and just broke it all over the place. And I actually put that moment in the book because I really did feel it like I was given a beautiful thing by a beautiful place.
Talk for just a minute, if you would, about magic systems. And I think the first time we talked, we didn't really get into it, but I would love to hear about how you developed the supernatural aspect to this series, and your magic system. And I know you said that there are ties to Salem and these other stories, but did you have a conscious effort when you began that there are going to be certain aspects and this is how it works and this is what I'm going to draw from? Did any of that, or did it just come to you organically?
No, it came to me from Washington Irving, because
Okay.
I studied The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and I was like, okay, what meanings can you read into certain lines? And so early on, there's a passage that goes something like, the dominant spirit that haunts this secluded glen is a apparition of a horseman, without a head, right? There's just the phrase, the dominant spirit who seems to be commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air, is how Washington Irving described them. I say, what does that mean? What does it mean to be the dominant spirit? And what does it mean to have command over the powers of the air? And just kind of, okay, take that little innocuous sentence in Washington Irving and add it to the system. And I created this idea that cemeteries are essentially cities of ghosts, and each cemetery has a dominant spirit. And if the dominant spirit is a good one, you'll have a fairly happy cemetery. And if it's an evil one, then the cemetery kind of goes sour. And the general of the dead comes from that concept, the dominant spirit as being the general of all the other spirits under his command, and being the commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air. So the magical system is really, you take a sentence and then you dream from it. And even it can be a sentence of your own, and you come up with some particular turn of phrase, and there's something very rich there. And I did something kind of inspirationally in book one. My characters have superpowers. There are you get your superpower essentially by being knocked out of your body by a ghost, and you go through a little coma state, and if you survive it, you come back and you get a power that fits your personality. And that came out of Ichabod and the pumpkin. He throws the pumpkin and knocked Ichabod out, and I was like, okay, what if that gave Ichabod a particular supernatural gift that he passed down to his descendants? And so from that, in Legend of Sleepy Hollow, that part of the magical system comes. And then the question is, so why, if this is how the world works and all these people have powers, why don't we know about it? And from there, I invented the Great Curse, which is the big overarching magical rule of the world that I've created. Basically, anyone who finds out about a true supernatural, because of a great curse that was cast in the Salem witch trials to protect the gifted, if you find out about a witch, you die. You're targeted by a ghost, and you either are killed in that situation, or you become one of the gifted yourself by surviving it. And just that alone, it's not a very complicated concept, but if you take the implications of it and you create this entire subculture of people who have to hide because if they reveal what they are, their friends are going to die, that becomes a very interesting set of world building. And you just take that one rule and suddenly you have a magic system. And it all just comes out of what interests you about the world you're creating. And it's very hard to find a unique magic system anymore. I mean, It's
Yeah.
very hard. I mean, so many have done, and I don't know that the Great Curse has ever been done in this sense, and so it's mine, and that's a beautiful thing to come across. Is something that is original and that has all kinds of places you can go for it, because then you want to break the Great Curse someday, and people are trying to break the Great Curse so they can come out into the open. And when was the Great Curse passed, and how many people died when it was first cast? It just opens up all kinds of story possibilities if you can find that one idea.
I love it. Um, Richard, you have audiobook versions of book one and two that are uh, stunning productions. Really,
Eric
really
Michael
well done.
Summerer is a brilliant narrator. Eric Michael Summerer, I can't recommend him enough. He's just been extraordinary.
He has. And so my natural question is, will we have an audiobook for book three?
Absolutely. Eric,
Do you know when?
well, Eric says he's ready to go on it, and I'm ready to go as soon as the book is finalized. As soon as November 27th comes, finalized November 15th or so. But I'm ready to go into production. But these things take time, and particularly a book
Sure.
this long, it's going to be 30 hours.
Yeah.
So it'd be May, be April, May,
Okay.
something like that. Maybe March if he's fast. But it's all something that you don't want to rush. And he's done such a beautiful job on Rise Headless and Bridge of Bones. I have nothing but high praise. And that's actually my preferred way. If you're going to read my stuff, I would love for you to sit down with the audiobook, because, as I say, I come from a playwriting background, and to hear it spoken aloud is just like radio drama to me, and that's the way I love it. So
It absolutely is, and you can tell. Uh, we mentioned it earlier that you can tell. Audiobooks are great ways for you to tell if the writer really understands, especially dialogue, but
mhm.
even just prose in general, because they're your narration and your backstory should roll just like dialogue does, and and the audiobooks are absolutely phenomenal.
I
I
usually talk
cannot.
aloud while I'm writing. I usually talk aloud when I'm writing. And one thing that Eric is so good at giving me little voices and stuff, that I find that he did a remarkable job with the climax of Rise Headless, which has a lot of short, choppy phrases and a lot of tricks. And I love writing these sections that have particular rhythmic devices, etc. And I found myself in General of the Dead, I did an entire chapter that is specifically designed to be a tour de force for Eric, of cricket chirps and crunching feet and pant, 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 and crackling fire and river rushing and everything that I could throw into. I just wanted to give him a one chapter to just go nuts. It was a lot of fun to write. But
That was
you have to write. You have to do these things out loud. The more
yeah.
you talk it as you're writing it, the better it'll sound in audiobook.
Well, that was my other question was, did you uh, when you saw how well the first audiobooks were, did you find yourself writing parts specifically for him to act out?
Well, I found
That's
myself hearing him when I wrote characters.
love it. Yeah.
That I heard his Eliza suddenly and not mine, and his Eliza was better than mine. I and there are things like there's just a little touch here and there in Bridge of Bones where he actually just sounds like an 80-year-old woman very naturally, and it's extraordinary stuff. It's just he's an extraordinary narrator, and I can't say enough good things about him. He's also extremely professional, and I've only had to I give him a note here and there, and he does exactly what he gets it immediately.
I love it. I can't wait to hear his audiobook production.
Me neither.
Though I will have read the book before then, so
Mhm.
I could just enjoy it, in a different way then. But General of the Dead releases November
27th. It's Black
27th.
Friday. Black Friday, the
Black
day after
Friday.
Thanksgiving.
Okay,
I figured
but
if
we
I couldn't
can.
release Halloween, at least Black Friday sounded cool.
There you go. And we can go pre-order that now. Is that right?
Yes, it's available on Amazon, as are the other two. And Bridge of Bones is doing great for Halloween. I mean, we're up to like number 7 in young adult horror, and we're beating Twilight, and it's
Ah,
it's
yes.
good. It's a great time. Good for
That,
the series
that's
right now.
great. Well, we're going to send everyone to go over and pick up Arise, Headless, and Ride and Bridge of Bones and go ahead and pre-order General of the Dead. I'm going to go pre-order General of the Dead right now so that it will immediately go to my Kindle when I wake up November 27th.
And you can
Richard,
also, one thing, you can also visit the Jason Crane series on Facebook. And I post like maps of colonial Tarrytown and research and a lot of interesting things there that don't make it in the book end up making it to Facebook. So the Jason Crane series, you just look that up. We have a lot
excellent
of talks.
Yeah,
too.
and I'll post a link in the show notes. Richard, my friend, I love you. I love what you do, and thank you so much for coming back on the show. And happy Halloween to you.
Happy Halloween to you too, Hank. Have fun in your shorts. And I'm so glad that we got a chance to do this, and I think I will go rent a car and see if I can see some foliage while it's here. It's really beautiful.
You might as well. And post some pictures on Facebook for us.
Yeah, I will do.
I think do that. I think everyone would love for you to put a setting to that for us.
I'm definitely spending Halloween in Sleepy Hollow. I have tickets. I'm hearing the legend performed at the Old Dutch Church, and maybe go on a cemetery tour and just make a beautiful day of it. So, and I encourage people to do the same. If you like the books, everything that I write about, it's there. Go find it, celebrate it, experience it, look it up, learn the history. It's a wonderful place. So,
excellent. We'll do it. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Hank.